The first thing I noticed wasn't my father's face. It was the way the room changed when he walked in. The air tightened, voices softened, smiles turned careful. It was my commissioning ceremony day, the moment I had worked toward for more than a decade, yet my chest didn't swell with pride the way everyone said it should. It sank, because I knew what his presence meant. For years, he had treated my career like a misunderstanding that would eventually correct itself. I straightened my uniform anyway, shoulders back, spine steady, reminding myself that rank doesn't disappear just because someone refuses to see it. I told myself not to expect anything, not approval, not praise, not even respect. I didn't know he would try to reduce me in front of the very people who had trusted me with their lives, and I didn't know that the quiet response that followed would finally end a lifetime of shrinking. My name is Natalie Cross. I was 33 years old when this happened, standing on a parade ground in Virginia, newly promoted, surrounded by officers who knew exactly what it had taken for me to get there. To my family, my life still looked unfinished. I wasn't married yet. I didn't work in finance or law. I didn't speak in impressive titles that fit neatly into cocktail conversation. What I did instead was lead. I served as an operations officer in the U.S. Army, responsible for planning missions, managing personnel, and making decisions that didn't allow for ego or delay. It was the kind of work that rewarded clarity and punished arrogance. My father never understood that. I grew up in Holloway Ridge, a quiet, expensive town where success was visible and carefully curated. My father, Richard Cross, built his identity around control. He was a senior partner at a consulting firm, the kind of man who spoke in forecasts and outcomes, who believed authority came from money and proximity to power. My mother learned early how to soften his edges. My younger brother learned how to echo him, and I learned how to disappear without leaving. When I was young, my father used to say I had potential, the kind of word that sounded encouraging until it was followed by conditions. Potential if I chose the right path, potential if I stopped insisting on doing things the hard way. By the time I chose the military, the word disappeared entirely. My father believed leadership meant control from the top. I learned leadership meant accountability from the center. When I enlisted, he didn't argue, he dismissed it, said it was temporary, said I'd grow out of it once I realized how the real world worked. Years passed, training turned into command turned into responsibility. His opinion never changed. Every promotion was met with silence, every award minimized, every sacrifice reframed as poor planning. At family gatherings, my job was summarized into something safe and small, a version that made him comfortable. I stopped correcting him, not because he was right, but because I was tired. The commissioning ceremony wasn't about him, it was about the people I served beside, the mentors who shaped me, the soldiers who trusted my judgment. Still, when I saw him take his seat, I felt that old tension return, the instinct to brace, to prepare. I didn't know yet that this would be the last time I would let his perspective define the emotional temperature of my life. I just knew something was about to shift. The ceremony unfolded with precision, names called, ranks acknowledged, hands shaken with weight and intention. I stood where I belonged, posture steady, eyes forward, feeling the quiet gravity of the moment settle into my bones. This wasn't pride, the loud kind people talk about. This was earned calm, the kind that only comes after years of being tested without witnesses. When it was over, the crowd shifted, families gathered, photos were taken, congratulations moved through the space like currency. That was when my father stepped forward. He didn't look angry, he looked certain in the way men do when they believe they are correcting a misunderstanding. He spoke to someone beside me, not to me, and the words landed exactly where he intended them to. Not loud enough to cause a scene, just loud enough to shape perception. I felt the familiar sensation tighten in my chest. Not surprise, recognition. This was his pattern. Diminish quietly, control the narrative, let others absorb the message without confrontation. For a moment, nothing happened, and then something did. The officers around me didn't react the way my father expected. They didn't laugh politely, they didn't nod, they didn't shift the conversation. They paused, not awkwardly, assessing. I watched it happen from a strange distance, the way you watch a storm roll in after years of studying weather patterns. You know exactly what's coming, but you don't interfere. One of my senior mentors turned slightly, eyes moving from my uniform to my father's face, then back to me. There was no challenge in his expression, only confirmation, the kind that doesn't need explanation. I realized something then that I hadn't fully allowed myself to see before. My father was the only one in that space who still believed I needed translation. I didn't defend myself, not because I couldn't, because I didn't need to. For years, I had carried the urge to explain, to justify, to prove worth to someone who had already decided the outcome. Standing there, surrounded by people who knew exactly who I was, that urge finally dissolved. I let the silence do its work. Silence, when backed by authority, doesn't weaken you. It reveals who is speaking without it. The energy changed subtly. My father noticed it too late. The conversation moved past him, not aggressively, just efficiently, as if his input no longer fit the structure of the moment. I felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest, not triumph, alignment. For the first time, my internal truth and my external reality matched. Power doesn't announce itself. It becomes obvious when it no longer needs permission. My father spent decades believing authority flowed from titles and wealth. He never understood the kind of authority that comes from responsibility carried quietly and consistently. And in that moment, surrounded by leaders who trusted me without needing to be convinced, his definition collapsed, not dramatically, irreversibly. I knew this wasn't the end. People like my father don't adjust immediately. They retreat, they reassess, they attempt to reassert control later in subtler ways. But something fundamental had shifted. He could no longer pretend I was unfinished, and I no longer needed him to understand. The reckoning didn't arrive that day. It came later, in quiet spaces, in moments without witnesses, in the absence of an audience. My father didn't confront me immediately. Men like him rarely do when certainty slips. They retreat first, they analyze, they try to rebuild control internally before re-engaging. Weeks passed, then months. The calls became less scripted, the questions less performative. The certainty in his voice softened into something unfamiliar, uncertainty. When we eventually sat across from each other, there was no explosion, no raised voices, no accusations, no emotional leverage. I spoke calmly. I didn't ask for understanding, I didn't ask for approval, I didn't ask for praise. I stated conditions. Respect was no longer optional. Dismissal would no longer be absorbed. My career was not a phase, a compromise, or a mistake to be corrected. It was my life, and I would not continue a relationship that required me to shrink to preserve someone else's comfort. Boundaries don't threaten healthy relationships, they expose unhealthy ones. Something shifted in him then, not dramatically, not completely, but honestly. He began asking questions without preparing rebuttals. He listened without waiting to redirect. He acknowledged gaps instead of filling them with assumptions. For the first time, he wasn't trying to redefine me, he was trying to understand. That effort mattered more than perfection ever could. I didn't rebuild the relationship the way he expected. I didn't return to old patterns. I didn't perform reconciliation. I didn't chase closeness. I allowed space, healthy distance, intentional connection, clear expectations, love without erasure. Some people mistake distance for punishment. It isn't, it's self-preservation. Years later, I stood in uniform again at a different ceremony. This time, my father sat quietly among the families. He didn't speak for me, he didn't explain me, he didn't minimize me. When it was over, he congratulated me without qualifiers. Not loudly, not publicly, sincerely. That was enough. Not because it fixed the past, but because it honored the present. Some people only respect you once they realize they can't redefine you. Others never will. Your job is not to wait for recognition. Your job is to live so fully inside your truth that misunderstanding becomes irrelevant. Authority isn't inherited, it isn't announced, it isn't negotiated. It's built quietly and recognized eventually.